switching advice. EnergyWatch did some work with Castle Vale Housing Association in the West Midlands. The purpose of that, they had a high penetration of prepayment meters, a low degree of switching between suppliers. So we did some really intensive training and intensive advice sessions with the housing association staff, with the tenants groups, on the street, in community centres, and also by nomination of people coming forward. We found a very few number of people wanted to switch. What we uncovered, and this speaks again to Richard's point about the provision of debt advice and helping people with their problems, was a mountain of issues that those consumers have with their energy supplier. Poor levels of debt management, unachievable levels of repayment of debt, forced prepayment, aggressive dialogue, all with threats of disconnection. All that really means is those consumers are either too fearful to talk to their energy suppliers about the help they actually can provide them, or that conversation is dead. I mean, there is no dialogue to be had, and given that we use energy suppliers as a vehicle, we use them a lot as a vehicle to provide social and energy efficiency support, that conversation has to be a live one. It may be too much to expect it to be a trusting one, but it has to at least be a dialogue. And I think there's a tremendous amount that housing associations can do, first of all, to represent the views of tenants and tenant groups, and help tenant groups get this message across to suppliers and regulators that hang about there's something wrong with the way energy suppliers and their tenants and tenants relate to each other, but also to see what can be done with other agencies. We've already heard working in partnership with debt agencies, with citizens advice bureaus, with bodies like EnergyWatch, to give tenants the confidence to make the few choices that are available to them in the energy market to make things work slightly better. So I think the issue around prepayment meter is a key one for housing associations. Bigger preponderance in social housing, bigger preponderance in Wales, punitive prices, inability to switch, linked to poor debt management. It really will crystallise for many people the way in which they experience fuel poverty as a payment method. But there's a couple of other things as well that I think we're starting to see emerge from social housing providers and housing associations across Britain. One is around procurement. And that's really, if talking to your tenants about the way in which they can make the market work slightly better for them is a way of going with the grain of the market, there's a possibility of working against the grain of the market. It's how is it possible to take tenants out of the competitive market if they're not getting the benefits of the competitive market. And I think there's been some good work done in Black Country housing associations about the way you can use the scale, the procurement power that housing associations have, especially in very tight geographical areas, to, in a way, take communities out of the competitive market to an extent in order to get a better negotiated deal with energy suppliers. It's not widespread, it's not really thought through, but if it's something there which some housing associations are able to start making work, I think it's really important that it's shared across the whole community of housing associations. The other thing that is also about going against the grain is about self-sufficiency. Aberdeen, very kind of well-known example where this provision of community health, community heat and distributed generation is allowing whole communities not to buck the trend of price, because no one can buck the trend of price, but to manage it in better ways and trying to achieve carbon abatement targets and energy efficiency targets and cost-saving targets through the provision of local renewables, of community heat provision, in order just to identify tenants as a group who have greater power because they are a group, because they have procurement power, because they have the ability to frame some kind of more collective sense of engagement with the energy market. There should be tremendous opportunities there for housing associations. And it's also about understanding the whole, there were lots of other mechanisms mentioned this morning, feed-in tariffs, microgeneration, smart meters, and the danger. I would support individually all of those. Like Richard said, these are very atomised, these can be very atomised projects and issues. They get taken forward, they have single objectives, and they don't often feed into other issues in the energy market. All those three have the opportunity to benefit low-income households and housing associations, but only if the design and the implementation of those mechanisms are done in order that that housing associations, social providers and low-income consumers can benefit. The smart meters, originally when EnergyWatch was pushing very hard for smart meters, it was because there were three clear benefits, potential benefits. One, it ends this mess of a third of all bills going to households being wrong, and the consequences of that can be consumers being chased for a debt they just didn't think they had, because they've had a series of estimated bills. They get an accurate bill, it's £500 more than they thought, they're being chased for that debt. You can sort that out. It can end this really obscene premium that people on prepayment meters have to pay, and it enables people to start getting control, some understanding and validate energy savings actions. But there's no reason why smart metering of itself is going to achieve those objectives. The only reason it will achieve those objectives is if organisations like housing associations, like the Energy Savings Trust, like EnergyWatch, and the Watch Consumer Council get in there and make sure it does. Make sure that the design of these various schemes are done in order that they bring benefits to fuel-poor, low-income households. Similar for microgeneration. I mean, one of the, I hate to use the word Cinderella issues, but the preponderance of fuel-poor homes off gas network, a long way off the gas network, solid wall, and maybe experiencing some of the climatic issues that we know are true in parts of Wales and in Scotland. There is no coherent package of support. There is no coherent focus on what might be brought to those communities and those households to bring them out of fuel poverty, because they're in the too difficult zone. And one of the problems about the whole number of fuel-poor households increasing from the 4.5 million possibly to 6 million by the end of the year, and who knows where by the end of 2009, is there's going to be lots more easy pickings, if you want, for the programs without having to delve into the really difficult problems of solid wall, off-gas, hard-to-treat homes. Now, the issue about microgeneration holds tremendous potential, either for on-site domestic household support or for off-site collective community regeneration. But the capital costs associated with microgeneration are going to really make it impossible, just as the capital costs, if you want, of connection to the gas mains make it impossible for a low-income consumer to get the benefits of mains gas. There's a potential they can make it very difficult for low-income consumers, low-income households to take advantage of renewables, unless we start hardwiring into these programs that they must be first and foremost, or at least in the major way they're conceived and implemented, about helping those who need the help most. We should none of us be surprised if they become niche schemes, they don't find their way to the most low-income, hard-to-treat, vulnerable households, and again we're left with another single-strand, siloed kind of program that is missing those people who need it most. So I guess what I'm saying is the key message I'd like to get across is everyone's doing a lot. I mean, no one wants to see fuel poverty. I think everybody who would ever come on this platform would be equally committed to the goal of eradicating fuel poverty. They will all be heavily engaged in putting huge amounts of time, energy, money and resource into driving forward those programs they think are most likely to work. But let's not kid ourselves that amounts to a coherent and proportionate strategy to eradicate fuel poverty, because it doesn't. Because to do that, you need to have a clear idea of what the causes and the drivers are. You need to have a proportionate way of identifying and getting to the root causes, in this case the failure of the market and the price of gas, and then you need to make sure that your programs are driven by the level of support they provide to the consumers who need it the most. And until we have that, it's not a very easy thing to say, it's much more difficult for the people who have to do it. It's easy for me to say. Others have to go out and deliver those programs and think those programs through and get through the jurisdictional issues. But until we do that, then you can have 100 more programs coming up here, all of which are individually worthwhile, all will bring individual benefits to certain groups of consumers, but we will not have tackled this fundamental issue about how we deal with the growing issue of fuel poverty today, and heaven forbid in 2009, when some commentators are saying we're looking at 9 million households across GB and fuel poverty.